Don't forget, ko-fi.com/stopwritingalone is a real simple way to show your support for what's going on here week after week. Hi everyone, this is Nicole Rivera and you're listening to the Stop Writing Alone podcast for writers who are looking for their writing community. I know you want to find readers for your work, but I think your first step is to connect with other writers. That's what we're going to do here in the Stop Writing Alone podcast. We'll do writing prompts and other writing group activities, discover online writing communities, learn how to find local writing groups, or how to make your own. Join us as we explore, learn, and write. Hi everyone, this is Nicole Rivera and you're listening to Stop Writing Alone. This week I get to share with you Brian Mooney, the creator of all things Storymatic, whether we're talking about the classic game or Rememory or Synapsis, a brand new game that I still need to learn about, or even Storymatic Kids. If you've played the games before, you already know how brilliant they are, but now it's time to meet the genius behind them. Brian Mooney, teacher, writer, game creator. I'm going to toss you right over into this interview so that you can hear all of our talk about where the games came from, what kind of writing Brian's doing, all of his creative backgrounds in theater and comedy, poetry. There's just so much goodness here. So enjoy. I am so grateful that I got to speak to Brian Mooney and share all of the genius that he is with you. So here it goes. Enough from me. Let's get into the interview. Enjoy. Okay, hey everybody, it's Nicole, and I'm feeling really, really lucky today to have Brian Mooney with us today. He is the creator of the Storymatic game, or I should say games, because we have multiple games coming out of the company, and I've shared them a couple of times with you guys. We did an episode earlier about writing games, and we discussed it there, and then if you've been following the 52 prompts in YouTube, then you saw we did a week where we featured two of the games, Storymatic and Rememory, and it's been so much fun playing with these games on my own and sharing them with the community. I just had to reach out to Brian so that we could hear from him first about where it came from and what is going on now, the other games that I don't know anything about yet. So, Brian, could you introduce yourself to the Stop Writing Alone community?
Hello, everybody. I'm really, thank you so much for inviting me on. This is great. I'm excited.
My pleasure. So I know a tiny bit of the story. You were once a teacher, is that right?
Yeah, I started teaching when I was in graduate school at UMass Amherst, and then I taught composition and fiction and poetry workshops at Marlborough College. And for years, I taught creative writing at the Putney School summer programs, which is a really great summer intensive program for kids from around 13 to 18. That's the
Oh,
low end
wow.
and the high end. And it's a fantastic program for people who have high school or rising freshmen who are interested in the arts and want to take 3 weeks or even 6 weeks out of their summer to paint and do photography and dance and theater
Oh,
and
wow.
write. And I was really very fortunate to be the fiction and poetry teacher there for many years. And then I've also done a little bit down at Smith College in the young women's writing workshops.
And now that summer program that still goes on now, that's something that's still
Yeah,
available?
and they
Oh,
also
wow.
have an adult week. So the summer
Oh,
program
my.
lasts for 6 weeks. There's 2 3-week sessions. And again, this is the
Okay.
Putney School Summer Arts Programs. And um, for quite some time, we were hearing, I would hear from parents, and the director of the program would hear from parents that they really wanted to have that kind of camp arts experience. And so Tom Howe, the director of the program, said, you know what, let's just do it. Let's just have a week long adult program at the end of the kids program. And I'm
Awesome.
thinking, I taught it there for a few years, and then it just got kind of logistically too difficult to do that. But I'm thinking that maybe this summer I'll do that adult week again.
Oh, cool.
And that's kind of meet you wherever you're at. If you're interested in doing memoir, if you're interested in doing poetry, if you're interested in doing fiction or creative nonfiction, just try to set up a week long thing where all of the prompts that we're doing work for whatever you're doing.
That's
It's great.
great.
It's really fun, and it's a beautiful campus, great food. Um, so that's my big plug for there. And,
Definitely. I
and
mean, it
that's
sounds
also,
amazing.
yeah, it is. It's great. And that's a lot of Storymatic comes from working with the kids at that Putney program.
And so like you said, you're trying to create prompts to reach people where they're at. So that's kind of what Storymatic, I guess, was. The early version was you just coming prepared to class, being a good teacher.
Yeah, since we have a little bit of time, I'm going to go way back in the story of Storymatic when I don't usually get into this part of it. But the earliest part of Storymatic goes back to when uh, my wife and I lived in Seattle, and in the early 90s, my goodness.
Okay.
And we went to a party and didn't really know anybody there. And I remember I had a Sharpie and a roll of masking tape. And since I didn't know anybody, I was just standing by the door. And as people came in, I would write masking tape name tags for them. And
Okay.
it was really fun and funny, and people liked them. And I kind of held on to that idea. And then just as a fun thing to do. And when I was in graduate school several years later, I had a good friend who had a business card that just had his name, and then dinner guest was his occupation. And I
Amazing.
really liked that idea. And I've always liked,
That's amazing.
yeah, isn't that great? And and I've always liked just the idea of how our brains, um, through the associative power of unconscious associative power of our brains, we're always trying to make connections between random things. And
Mm,
so I had those things kind of in the way, way, way in the back of my mind. And jumping ahead a few years, I had a fiction workshop up at Marlborough College, and I one night needed to make a prompt for the next day, and I started just putting, here's an occupation, this is a personality trait, this is a job, this is a place, this is an object, and I just wrote down a bunch of little things like that, and then divided them up, and I put them into little um, brown paper lunch bags. And so there were 5 or 6 different lunch bags, and I brought all of those into class, and people drew from each bag. And in the process of doing that, um, it was so much more interesting to just start combining the character
yeah.
traits, um, and consolidate some of these different discrete categories. And it worked well enough in that class that then in the summer at Putney, um, I tried it again and it went well. And then I spent some time at the copy machine and I transcribed my notes onto different colored um, construction paper.
Oh,
And
God bless.
that was kind of how it all started out, was literally scraps of paper in a lunch bag and construction
Love it. Amazing. Amazing. That's great. And I love that it started with kids because you have the Storymatic Kids now too, and it's just always keeping that connection. I feel like I may have leaped over something here and not asked about Brian Mooney, the writer. Do
paper. Oh,
you Are you yourself someone that was always loving prompts, or just like, what do you write, Brian?
um, thank you for asking that. It's because it's a big part of Storymatic, but it's not something that I um, really get into a whole lot. Um, you can find so I used to do a bit of playwriting, and that was one of the reasons
Okay.
why we moved out to Seattle, and then kind of
Gotcha.
moved from playwriting into short fiction, and
Mm.
have published not a lot, but a decent amount of short stories. You have to look for them under my full name, Brian David Mooney, because
Oh,
I
that's
didn't
the secret.
realize, yeah, that's the secret. I didn't realize until Google came along that the name that I thought was rather unique is totally not unique. And there are so many Brian Mooneys out there. So at a
Oh,
certain point, I
really?
started, for my official writing name, I use my middle name, which also
Gotcha.
is not unique. And there's a number of Brian David Mooneys out there as well.
Yeah, I
Um,
gave up. My name's Nicole Rivera, so it's gonna be hard to find me always.
Yeah, and you think that you have this unique name, and you go through life, and then you Google yourself, and you discover, oh, I don't. I don't.
Right.
I should have given myself a pen name years ago.
Yes.
So I have short stories. I love short stories. I love teaching short fiction, and and I have some poetry out in the world as well. And for the last the last several years, I've been working on a short novel called Everything is Two Things at Once: The Secret Report of Frank Dodge, and that's pretty much done. And I'm like everybody else, I have to find representation. I used to have an agent,
Mm,
but he retired, and so I'm kind of back to square one
how
with
dare
that.
he?
Yeah, yeah.
Can't
So
retire before you do. Come
yeah.
on.
Uh, so so I am um, very I'm thinking about my own work a lot in terms of Storymatic, and if I stall out on my own work, I will go to Storymatic and
Awesome.
try to move myself forward that way for sure.
That's fantastic. I love that. I love that. Yeah, it occurred to me this morning. I'm like, Brian's got to be writing somewhere, and I don't know about this. You can't be uh, this, full of these, like you said, these wonderful connections and everything, and not be going further with it, and making these stories. So it sounds like most of what you've been writing is fiction, um, a- and then the poetry. So, what drove you to make the leap from Storymatic, which is very similar to the paperbacks like you were talking about, to Rememory, which is more of a tapping into our true stories?
Well, I teach in my poetry classes. One of the big themes that we use is memory. Memory,
Mm,
place, and animals are my three big themes that I use in poetry class, because pretty much everybody, no matter how young you are or old you are, you have something around that.
yeah, for
And
sure.
after Storymatic had been out for a little while, and Storymatic Kids, um, my memoir and poetry students were like, "Hey, where's the one for us?" And
Mm,
so so they kind of gave me a little bit of a push, and I'm fascinated by memory, and I think a lot of my writing, um, as time goes by, I kind of realize a lot of it is informed by memory. And
mm,
so it was something that I was that I was hearing that the students wanted, and it made sense as a next iteration of Storymatic. And I, I mean, I like them all, obviously. Rememory is really a powerful thing, and it can. I think of memory as a country, and Rememory really helps you explore the country of memory, because we often um, have these go-to memories in our lives, and they're well-worn paths, and Rememory can help you walk down those familiar paths, but then it also helps you explore the various veins and arteries that go off of those well-worn paths. And I think that's
mm,
really interesting. And I've always thought that with Rememory, it can help. access tiny little moments that you might have forgotten about. One of my favorite memories that I've heard was, and actually, one of the little call outs on the box is from this person who, I think she drew, spring, back porch, and parent. And
Mm,
all she said, she got this very wistful look in her eyes. And she said, when I was a little girl, I remember sitting on the back porch, and my father would be making breakfast in the morning, and we had horses, and I would sit on the back porch in the spring and watch them steam.
mm,
And then she said, I
wow.
haven't thought of that in years. And I think, and I put that on the box. I love that memory, and that tiny little moment is really helps illuminate, larger themes in life.
Yeah, we always talk about trying to get as specific as possible, and that really is the more specific you can get, it's almost the more wide-reaching you can be with your writing.
Right.
It's weird oxymoron type of situation going on. So you're absolutely right. Like every time I do the Rememory cards, it does draw me in, and I love the steps. Like first it's who it's about, and it's like you're focusing in until you get to this pinpoint, and it's really really quite powerful.
I think that, some abiding principles that I have for my own writing and for my teaching are that, simple is complex, and complex does not necessarily make anything simple, but, um, uh, simple is hard, simple is complex, simple can be very
Yeah,
complicated. And in the
absolutely.
specific, you find the universal. You don't necessarily find the specific in the universal, but you do find the universal in the specific.
Yeah,
Um,
it's
and I
amazing.
and so the whole storymatic world kind of is structured around that. And then there's this wonderful Robert Frost quote of, no surprise in the writer, no surprise in the reader, no tears in the writer, no tears in the reader. and and I really
Wow.
believe in that as well. And so in thinking about Storymatic and thinking about my own writing and in thinking about my own teaching, a lot of it is about moving somebody, helping somebody in a very safe, comfortable way and in a supportive way to move them to a surprise. And that
Yeah,
sometimes in memory, that surprise you've been carrying around inside of you the whole time.
yeah, that's beautiful. I hear and feel your teacher soul. I was a teacher for 10 years, so you know that that importance of being in a safe space is really for writers. I don't know if everyone recognizes how desperately writers need that safety all the time, because we are so vulnerable as we step into these things, whether they're memories or even just, some fictional tale that is riding very close to our own personal truth. It's just that safety is so important, and I love that that is behind the thought of all of your creations. I think it's strange because it's like, how could that be translated through a deck of cards? But it somehow is, and maybe it's just in the description of how we go through the process, but it does feel like we're very much guided to a space that, like you said, we'll get to a surprise, and it'll be magnificent. It might be something that we hadn't thought of in a while, but we know why we're there, and we can appreciate it and move forward and bring that story to life. So thank you for hanging on to that piece, because I think it's so important.
Well, it's and the work that you're doing with Stop Writing Alone is an embodiment of that, and of trying to, writing can be so isolating, and it's kind of easy to get this notion, this almost romanticized notion that it's supposed to be very self-isolating.
Yeah.
And when you can feel that you are part of a community, whether it's, an actual physical community, like a classroom that might meet regularly a couple of times a week, or if it's a virtual thing where you're checking in with people, ultimately that is about creating, a safe environment, and it's a physically safe environment, and it's an emotionally safe environment, because if you feel safe, then it's easier to have fun. And if you're
Right.
having fun, then it's easier to take a little bit of a risk and to accept a challenge. And when you can accept that challenge, and when you can accept that risk, then you start to really learn, and you start to move into new areas. You start to be comfortable paddling around in the deeper water. And so it's really important what you're doing with establishing ways for people to feel safe in writing and exploring.
Thank you so much. I was trying not to go, yes, yes, through that whole thing, because I'm like, I'm gonna want all of this clip to be to be so perfectly. You said it all. I mean, that really is um, what I cherish, and I think is so helpful that we have that community. So you've had experiences, obviously, in community as almost the community builder, as the teachers. Have you had those similar experiences yourself as a writer? Where have you found your community for your writing?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm a little bit older now, and I find that the community changes. Originally,
Interesting.
the going back to I'll go all the way back, because you have younger people who are part of your community. I'm sure when I was in high school, I had my friend Chris, and I would share work, and we did not have the greatest, most supportive um, teachers. I think they were supportive in a way. I'm thinking of one person in particular who would just go and do stuff. And what I don't think I realized at the time, and I don't even think she necessarily realized it at the time, was she was just encouraging us to free write, and she was just trying to
Mm,
create a space where we could do that. But I don't think either one of us felt particularly safe in that space,
right.
probably because we were high school kids. But
Yeah.
having Chris really helped a lot. And he still sends me poems. I'll still send him some stuff. Um,
Cool.
and then becoming interested in theater in college and in playwriting, um, that for me, at the time when people were kind of surprised that suddenly I was interested in theater, I explained that at the time that I was not playing baseball anymore, and it kind of um,
Mm,
coincides nicely that as I left baseball in high school, I moved into theater shortly thereafter. And I think, reflecting about it, it was about this community, that the baseball community had changed a little bit for me, and it wasn't as much fun. And then I found this
mm,
safe, supportive community in theater, and that kind of moved me along into playwriting, and I loved that community. And from
yeah.
that community, um, my I did a bit of work with um, a very close friend, um, and he and I are we still share work constantly. And we had a little comedy group with a third
Cool.
person. And so Dan and John, from theater and from writing comedy, they're my go-to group right now.
Cool.
And then I went to grad school for writing, and there was a very structured community there. Um, but so the community that I have, um, they're people who have come from structured communities. They've come from that structured theater community. They've come from a structured writing program. And now we don't have those structures around us so much, but we still have a trust and a safety. And those people who are the first people that I'll share any of my own writing with, um, they're the ones that I'm least defensive when they give me
Mm,
some feedback, because I can tend to be
right.
a little bit defensive in my own writing.
I think we all can. I think
Yeah.
we all get like, what? You don't
So,
know.
the short answer, I think, is that the community can exist in that social construct of school or library program or bookstore
Mm,
storytelling writing thing on a Saturday morning. Um, and from those communities, you figure out who is most honest with me, who is most authentic, who do I feel safest with, that I will
mm.
actually hear the things that I need to hear. And then those relationships hopefully continue outside that structure that initially set those relationships up.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I love that you brought this up, the changing community over your lifetime, because it is true. Just because we shift from one part of our lives to another doesn't mean we can't find a new um, group, and right, why not look in the social circle that we're already in? Fantastic. I love it. I love it.
Who do you go to? Who are your go-to people?
So right now I've been a part of the local Staten Island writers group. I actually run it. So I have my co-organizer Nancy, who I need to interview already for this podcast. It's ridiculous. But we have been together in that group for so long that we're basically critique partners at this point, because when the group changes around us, it's still always just us. So we
Right.
have monthly meetings with that group where we have writing prompt meetings and we have critique meetings, and then I do a write-in for anybody that wants to come. But yeah, Nancy's probably my first person, and she's an editor on the side. Like that's one of her gigs that she does too. So she's a wealth of, like she's the person you want to like comb over and find. She's got the eye for every last little thing that you're not seeing when you get, you go blind. But yeah, that's been my number one. And then there's a couple other people that are in the group that are fairly consistent that um, I probably go to most consistently. And in the Stop Writing Alone community, it's interesting. We haven't gotten to that part yet of the critique, because so many people are just stepping in and being brave and getting words out there for the first time. So it's just getting those stories out. And that is something that I'm thinking about moving forward now, trying to get people to connect in that way so that we can build those safe those relationships. I mean, that's the thing. To me, I don't feel like I can start connecting people to critique until they feel cool with each other.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And
that's what I've
I
this year has been building all those foundations.
Yep, I completely hear that, and I don't think that you can make a mistake by spending too long building that foundation. Sometimes in
Exactly.
class, I'll feel like I'm really pouring a lot of concrete here to make sure that we have a solid
Right.
floor before we move forward. And I can tell that some people are chomping at the bit, like, okay, when are you going to
Yeah,
actually start talking about my work instead of just hearing it? And then I'll
absolutely.
reflect at the end of a class and go, I'm really glad that I spent that extra time. I'd rather have them chomping at the bit than to start to pull back and not feel completely
Yes.
safe and comfortable.
a
Safety
hundred
is the
percent.
first thing. You can't have fun unless you're feeling safe.
Yeah, it's so true. And it's funny because when I started to launch this podcast, so many people were like, "Oh, you could run critique groups. That could be, like that's the first thing." And I was like, Sure, but not yet. Like that can't happen first." So, and I would say to everyone, I know that when you go out into the online world, that's what all writers are looking for. Can you read my work? Can you read my work? And I will always write back to people. I'm like, you don't even really know me yet. Like, let's get to know each other first before we get there, because I just feel like you said, with your core people, they're the people that you can hear the critique from. And I just need to build that trust first so that somebody can actually hear where I'm coming from. I was a teacher coach too, and I recognize when you critique somebody, when it's a creation, and the same thing would happen with teachers' lessons, it's very personal, you know? And trying to get people to understand that I am literally just talking about the work and not you.
is part of that relationship building. Like you will get to know me to understand that if I'm giving you critique, it's not about you, it's about the work. And that's, what we're working together to make the best it can be,
Yeah, and it becomes very complicated because just the nature of critique itself, hidden in the word critique, is a lot of language. Critique for what end? Critique for
Yeah.
publication? Critique to please some some other entity, a parent, a teacher,
Mhm.
I can't remember who it is. It might be Natalie Goldberg who calls them, um, are they dark angels who sit on your shoulder
Mhm.
that, who are the voices of your fifth grade teachers who are still in
Yes.
your head critiquing
Still there,
you?
right?
And do you move forward in critique in order to silence those voices? It can become a
Right.
very, very
Yes,
emotionally wrought area. And
absolutely.
if you remove the emotion, is it critique in order to publish? And with Storymatic, I'm always happy when I see people who are um, trying to get what they write out into the world, whether it's a poem, an essay, a story, a film, um, any of that stuff. I'm always very happy about it. But I do try to take a step back and go, the point of Storymatic and the point of the teaching that I do, it's nice to move people towards publication, but you're not talking about all people. Um,
Right.
and but you can move a lot of people into writing as something that is just part of a daily creative practice that is meaningful solely for the act of writing. And
Yeah.
the act of writing a story, whether anybody reads it or not, helps you create empathy, because
Yes.
you are inhabiting characters and you are walking around in the world and looking at the world through different eyes. And that's a very, very important thing. You create empathy by reading literature, by reading stories, and by writing characters into the world. And that is not something um, that needs to be critiqued necessarily.
Right.
You can do that kind of work for yourself, for your friends, for the mental health benefits it endows on you, and be a very happy, contented, fulfilled person without really having to go through the gauntlet of the what can be the gauntlet of critique.
Right. Yeah, I agree 100%. Absolutely. I it's so there's so many different levels to writing, and we have to make sure that who we're talking to, we know what it is that they want from the whole experience. And there are, like you said, so many things that can be gained from it aside from seeing your book on a shelf. So
Yeah, and I
I
say
love
that
that.
all as somebody who really wants to get that book on the shelf and is
Same.
trying to
I'm
figure it out
absolutely the
just
same.
like everybody else.
Right.
Um, but
Right.
there's no reason why you can't sit around with your friends and tell stories to each other. And
Absolutely.
instead of looking at your phones or seeing what's on Netflix tonight, sit down with some cards and explore your own memories and the memories of your friends and family, and
Hmm.
um, have a sharing experience of stories and memories and even poetry. um, that has entertainment value unto itself.
Big time. Big time. So before we go, let's just make sure we talk about I need to know about Synapsis. This is so Storymatic Kids, I imagine, is basically the same as Storymatic, but what would be the age group for Storymatic Kids?
I think Storymatic Kids starts at around 5 or so, first grade or so. And that
Oh,
came about
interesting.
because,
I guess I do need it.
um, yeah, you have a 5-year-old, right?
That's right.
Yeah, yeah, it's perfect. Kids came about because parents and elementary school teachers were looking at Storymatic Classic, and they said, this is great, but it's simply just a little too sophisticated for my 5 or 6 year old. And so Storymatic Kids, the cards are a little thicker, the font is a little bit brighter, it's a little bit cleaner. Um, Cleaner in terms of the font. It isn't this kind of old school typewriter font. It's a kind of a
Type B,
newer
right?
type
Okay.
font. Um, and conceptually, Storymatic Classic has content that it's real world content. It's not Cards Against Humanity kind of content, but it's real life.
Right.
And it's real life because when I have my class of high school or college kids, I'm inclined to want them to write about the world and to be sincere about it. And so there's real life things in there. Um,
Right.
so conceptually, for example, the first one, what I call the classic, that has something is wrong with the water is one of the cards, and the kids
Mm.
one has mermaids and swimming pool. They both are
Ooh,
water
hey.
problems, but one is pretty hard to get super serious about, but the other could be about Flint, Michigan, or
Mm-hmm.
it can
Right.
be a very serious thing. Or you can have large wild animal, which could be a really silly thing, but it can also be a really serious thing. And in the kids, you
Right.
have befriended by hippo. So
Okay.
conceptually, that's kind of the difference.
Fantastic.
And there are also some blank cards in kids, so you can make up your own cards.
Oh my goodness, that's
Um,
fun. Okay,
and
so then oh, I'm
and
sorry,
so
go ahead.
synapsis is
That's my last mystery. Yes.
yeah, yeah. So that's the most recent one, and that comes about because uh, I like making up writing prompts in class,
Mm.
and I have a lot of prompts, and not just storymatic prompts. And so for the last, I don't know, several years, few years, 4 or 5 years or so, um, what I've been hearing my students when I have a class, they'll say, well, that improv thing that we just did, why isn't that one of these products? Or
Mm.
I like to do this synesthesia exercise. Synesthesia is when you experience one sense in terms of another. So you
Right.
hear color, or you see sound, or you might feel a smell. So in class, I call it writing across the senses. And I do this
Cool.
long, structured, guided prompt where I will give them a scenario. So you're on top of a mountain and it's winter and you're looking at the moon and you're the only one awake. Um, Write as fast as you can about what the moon sounds like. Not the sound of the mountain that you're on, but the moon itself. And
Mm-hmm.
what does the moon feel like? Not the cold or the breeze or any of that stuff, but the moon itself. What does it feel like?
Interesting.
And I find that helps pump up figurative language and
Big time, yeah, yeah.
metaphors, similes, and it's an interesting exercise. And for quite a while, I would do that exercise, and then people would say, "Why haven't you turned that into a game?"
Mm.
And then there's a couple of other ones, and they would say, "Why isn't that something that we can do outside of class?" So Synapsis pulls a bunch of these things together, and the idea in Synapsis is that you take um, you, you are prompted to write one sentence, and it's a very sense-based sentence. And there are cards that you just write a gray, blue, gray sentence, and you can add in whatever other language you want with what the cards say.
Mm.
And then you that sentence is often going to be a simile, and it's very sense-based, and it has a particular context. So I kind of got ahead of myself. First, you'll draw a card that will give you context. Say your sentence comes from the beginning of your young adult novel, and then you are prompted to
Okay.
write a sentence. And so you write a sentence, and it's oh, the the clouds all looked like dragons.
Okay.
And then people, you can do this by yourself, or you can do this in a group. If you're in a group, then people start asking you questions about that young adult novel. And since you've written that sentence, you kind of have a little bit of ownership, and you've kind of swung the door open a little bit into that book. And then as you answer questions about, well, what's the main character like? Where is this set? What's in one of the first memories for that character? As you answer these questions, you you kind of break into the story. You go into the story through the
Yeah,
back door, through the window, and you start
pretty
wandering
cool.
around in the story. And you're not telling the story, and you're not necessarily moving in any kind of linear beginning to end fashion, but you're coming at the story in a lot of different directions, from character, from motivation, from setting, from memory. And as after you
Yeah,
answer a few questions in some detail, you have a very good sense of what that story is about. So it's a
I love
bit
it.
more complicated, I think. I use complicated with some hesitancy because I don't want people to get the wrong idea. Um, the complicating thing is that you just have to give yourself over to the premise. And
Right.
when you do, you very quickly can walk into stories that are absolutely surprising in their richness. The one story that I think about when we were testing this, and and it just came out of the blue in the matter of 5 minutes. Um, uh, this woman was not thinking about the Manzanar detention camps at all. And the story she came up with was about a little autistic kid in Manzanar who's being detained. Manzanar is the Japanese internment camp in World
Right.
War II.
Wow.
And everybody knows what's going on, but he doesn't really know what's going on. He has a little flower garden on the roof of one of the
Mm,
cabins that they're detained in. And so he
my
has this kind
goodness.
of bird's eye view of things, and he's beginning to figure out that something is wrong.
Ugh.
And it was an incredible experience to see her open up this story and be completely surprised by where her imagination was going and how full and rich this story was, in a way that it had just walked into the room and sat next to her. So
I
that's
love it.
what
Ugh.
Synapsis is about.
Yeah, that's amazing. And what I love about it is that one of the things that new writers I find struggle with most is like finishing things. And I think it's because they lose that enamor for the premise, whatever the shiny new idea was. I love that the whole, like, one of the main hinge points here is that you have to commit. You have to commit to your idea, and you have to stick with it no matter what question comes at you. You have to come up with an answer. It's uh yep, well, I'll be ordering that. So let's talk about that. Where can everybody get all of their games and all of the Storymatic, and where can people find you or your writing online so that they can get to you one on one?
Well, I love it when people can support their local brick and mortar stores. So I tend to, I used to work in a bookstore when I was a teenager, and so it's very
Mm,
natural and comfortable for me to focus on bookstores for where Storymatic is sold. But so check your local bookstore. There's at thestorymatic.com. There's a store map um, that is helpful for figuring out where near you there might be a store, or just to ask your local bookstore if they have it, and if they don't have it, why don't they have it?
right.
Otherwise, you can order online. You can get it through this storymatic.com, and um, I pack things myself. I pack things really well. I pack things a lot better than a certain online retailer where people might otherwise be inclined to shop. Um, and uh, we are hopefully going to be at Book Expo and Book Con. I love Book Con because we get to meet so many people and talk to them.
Hmm.
You and I think, met at Book Con at least
Yes,
once.
we did. At least
And
once. It might have been more than once, but yes.
hopefully that's going to continue. Um, one thing that we didn't really mention is the challenge of not writing alone in a time of quarantine.
Mm,
And so it's, having what you're doing be a checking in point for people is really good, because even though you might be alone at home, does not mean you are alone in the world.
Right. Yeah.
Um, and oh, and for my own work, you have to look stuff up under my middle name. It's quite different work than you might expect from Storymatic for some of the short stories. And hopefully, boy, just like everybody else, hopefully there'll be a book sometime
There'll
in
be
the
a
near
book
future.
soon. Right.
Yeah, I'll let you
I
know.
love it. Well, Brian, I can't thank you enough for all of this. I mean, just so much goodness. I feel like I want to steal you up someday to run a little teaching class for the Stop Writing Alone people, because you are a wealth of just creative, oh, everything. I feel all of your influences. I feel the theater, the comedy, the writing, the teaching, it's all there. And what a beautiful package you are for us. And thank you for sharing so much with us here, but also sharing all of your prompts with us through all these fun games that, again, I've always said it's like you said, it's great for writers, of course, but I love the idea of just sharing it with family to share story, just all of that. Anytime we can encourage people to come together around story, I am very excited, and you have done that for us. You've made it even easier. So thank you so much.
Oh, well, thank you. And I would be happy to do something down the road for sure.
Awesome. That's great news. All right, Brian, I'm going to let you go, and we may see each other at BookCon. I'm hoping, but like you, I'm sort of waiting to see what comes next here in New York City.
Yep. Yep. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Okay, that was amazing. So don't forget to head on over to Storymatic.com to see all these wonderful games that you can be playing, especially right now if you're stuck inside the house. What a fun and different thing to be doing with your time. It's something that, of course, as writers, we could be using to create our stories and our worlds, but there are so many different ways that you can also be using them with your family, whether they're writers or not, while everyone is doing their staying at home. Which reminds me of one other thing I wanted to mention to you this week, and that is, or was, the release of Lisa Murray's documentary film, Soul Providers. I interviewed Lisa early on in the Stop Writing Alone podcast and have been so inspired by her in so many different ways. But one of the things that we talked about in that first interview was this documentary that she had worked on so many years ago, was releasing at her film festival this past year. But what she had decided to do right now during this time where everybody's home is also do a wide release of Soul Providers via YouTube. She had this great premiere day where it was live streaming at all different times. This way she could accommodate as many different time zones. And I did share the link in the Stop Writing Alone Facebook groups when those live streams went on. But if you missed them, I'm going to put the link in the show notes to the Soul Provider movie, because right now Lisa is keeping it live on YouTube during this time where we can't get out to the movies, and maybe we need something different to be watching. We need some inspiration. Basically, the story is Lisa followed around a number of artists and creatives and interviewed them about their process and their art, and it's just really so much wonderful stuff. So like I said, that is a link that'll be in the show notes, one of the links that's outside the purview of Brian Mooney and Storymatic. In addition to that, I'm also going to share a link for a website called Karma, If you listen to the whole interview, you heard Brian and I talk about my critique partner from the Staten Island Writers Group, Nancy Canoe. And Nancy is a freelance editor. So she has a website and it has all of her services on there. So if anybody's interested in getting a second set of eyes on their work and getting that wonderful service that Nancy provides, she has on the website like all the different things that she can do for you. So that's Karma, and that will be in the show notes. Otherwise, I hope everybody's staying safe and enjoying what they can about this time and experience, whether it's with your families or getting some time alone or being completely overwhelmed by the insanity that is working from home. It's been a unique experience for everyone thus far, and I just hope that this is helping in some way, and I hope you're doing fine. But please feel free to reach out at any time if you need someone to connect to. Because we're not just talking about stop writing alone. We're talking about stop living alone, stop feeling alone and hurting alone, and all of those things. We can do this together. So, yep, I'm here, as always. Thank you so much for listening. There will be a new prompt on Friday on the YouTube channel NV Rivera. Otherwise, I will talk to you again next week or out on the interwebs. Thank you. Before you go, don't forget to subscribe to the Stop Writing Alone podcast wherever you're listening to this episode today. Then connect with us on Facebook at Stop Writing Alone Facebook page or in the Stop Writing Alone with Nicole Rivera Facebook group. Check Instagram or Twitter where I'm at NV_Rivera to find links to our email newsletter.